care what happens to her.
All right, get to talk about the Evil Dead trilogy, starting with the Evil Dead. Finally, get to talk about this. So, I watched when I used to watch this series when I was, I think it was in, I'd like to say elementary school, and I saw I saw Army of Darkness first, and then two, and then the first one. So I watched them completely backwards. And if you don't know me, I love horror comedies. I really do. And this series is pretty much horror comedies. It'll show you all these like horrific things and then turn it around and do something something funny. And I also think a lot of that credit goes to Sam Raimi, who did this entire trilogy. He's very much that kind of style. But so I saw this trilogy completely backwards, and then I watched the Evil Dead remake, and then I watched the Ash vs. Evil Dead TV series, which is awesome, by the way. Sucks that they canceled it after 3 seasons, but we're getting something animated about it, so we'll see. And then this year we got Evil Dead Rise, which is awesome. So I like Evil Dead. I love Evil Dead. So we finally get to talk about the series. So the first movie was 1981. And it was made during that time when like people who didn't graduate college or didn't have degrees in anything could grab a hold of a camcorder and just go and just film a movie. This is back when like anybody can get their hands on a camera. Whether you had to go out and rent it, go out and buy one, or you just had one lying around your house, you can easily just grab one and then go somewhere and just film a movie. And that's exactly what this kind of movie feels like. It feels like a couple of like two guys where just at home and just going like, hey, let's make a movie. Okay, what are we gonna do? Let's see, cabin in the woods, makeup and prosthetics on people's faces, let's and gore. Let's do it. It feels like that. It feels like one of those type of movies. And I'll say this, the first one I think to me is the weakest, but mainly because it was the one that was setting up it was trying to stand up on its feet. It was trying to basically get a foot in the door, and that's pretty much what they said. And that's what this movie feels like. And I really like it. So this movie feels like more just like a straight up horror movie, when with 2 it feels more like a horror comedy, and then Army of Darkness feels more like a comedy horror movie, where it's kind of like, horror's gonna kind of take a back seat, but it's still there, but it's gonna be more like slapstick. So yeah, it seems to change patterns with each movie, because then when we got the remake, it was just straight up horror, and then Evil Dead Rise, that was just a straight up horror. And then the Ash vs. Evil Dead series, they said that if you saw the first 2 movies, you know what to expect. So it was like a horror comedy. But with this one, it's just straight up horror. And I'll say this right off the bat, because it's all of their first movies. This is their first movie, like everybody involved. You can kind of tell they may have not did second takes, and we're just like, yeah, that's good enough. Let's just move on. And reading up a bit about it, when Bruce Campbell was on, I think it was Conan, he asked him that some people said that you guys got high while making the movie. And then Campbell said, like, oh, we did because we watched, it was, I think he said it was Easy Rider. And that Jack Nicholson had about, like, 40 plus joints before shooting a scene. And they said, like, well, if he can become, like, a very respected and incredible actor, then we can do the same thing. And yeah, they said that it didn't work, and so they had to refilm a lot over. But there was a ton of production problems. They found this cabin in, I believe it was Tennessee, and when they got there, the entire cabin was filled with, I think they said it was horse poop, but I can't remember. It was filled with poop. So they had to clean it all out and get a ton of Febreze to hopefully air out the cabin. They had no basement, so they actually had to cut a hole in the basement, and then all the basement stuff was shot later at a different location. I think one of their garages, I think. But the other thing too was they had a specific shooting date from like this time to this time, and it went on for months, and to the point where most of the actors left. And then when they were done filming, they realized, like, oh, we need to go back and film some extra stuff. They went back to the cabin and it was demolished. So that original cabin that's in the first movie does not exist anymore, unless they rebuilt it, but I highly doubt that. They when they got the eye contacts, the white eye contacts, they were specifically told, like, to keep them in like 15 minutes at a time, but they kept it in longer, and they said, like, it was like pouring hot sauce on your eyes. It's just all of them got hurt. They were pretty much just shooting it like day by day. There really was no plan. And I think they said another thing that happened was they were shooting a scene, and then they did it, and then they were waiting for the cut from Raimi, but it never came. That's because Raimi fell asleep, and so they had to wake him up, and he's like, oh, cut, oh, okay, cool. So they all got tired. But this feels like one of those, like I mentioned, this feels like one of those movies where it's just, you know what, let's just go and do it. And it's definitely a stepping stone in what you can do today, because, you know, everybody has, like, a lot of people have like iPhones or Samsung phones, or they have cell phones, and they have cameras attached to them, so you can practically go out and film a movie. So it's crazy, when back then you had to like rent, or you just had to be lucky that you had something, when today, it's a lot easier. So if you have an idea for something and you just want to just do it, then just you have the camera. The audio, may differ, but you have the visual. So you're all good to go. So, but the gore is pretty high, and actually to the point that the BBFC, which is basically the British version of the MPAA, for basically they provide ratings for movies. They were actually so shocked that this movie got made that they put it in the Video Nasties, which was a thing back in the 80s where, back in the 80s, anybody of any age can get a hold of horror movies when you went to your local, like, Blockbuster or your VA, movie store. Anybody can get a hold of horror movies, which is how you had, like, all these kids watching these scary movies or watching these gore films. And the Video Nasties were like a separate section, indicating that, like, yeah, these movies are basically just like pretty much comparing these gore flicks to like snuff films. So like this movie was put in there. I believe American Werewolf in London was put in there. There were a couple other movies like Cannibal Holocaust was put in there. So you had a whole group of these movies that were getting made that they just threw aside. And I believe there was actually at one point where they did compare Evil Dead to a snuff film, and they actually had to go to court. And if they lost, they went to jail. But luckily, they got the judge to, I believe they got the judge to watch the film and basically dismiss the case, going like, really? So, but, this was basically getting their foot in the door. And, for the first time, it's definitely has its flaws. You can clearly tell it's an amateur-made film, but that's part of its charm to it. Like, I can watch this movie and go like, yeah, this is clearly like shoestring, and like they're clearly like making it up as they go, but it's working. Because, if anybody of any age wants to make a movie, it would pretty much be like this. Unless they had a like very thought out plan, this is it. So it's not my favorite of the series by a long shot. It would have to go to a great, but I still really like it, and yeah, it definitely was a big stepping stone with horror movies. So next we got Evil Dead 2 in 1987.
Something so deadly. Something so evil. We prayed it would never happen again. Now, from the creator of Evil Dead comes Evil Dead 2.
Evil Dead 2, 1987, is pretty much a soft remake of the first movie, and here's why. So, the story of this one goes, it was writer-director Sam Raimi, Ash Williams himself, Bruce Campbell, and producer, I believe, was Robert Tappert. They didn't want to do another one. They didn't want to do a sequel. They mainly made the first movie just to get their foot in the door. But their next movie, which was 1985's Crime Wave, did poorly, like really bad. And so, according to sources, it was plagued with like production problems. The studio kept interfering, and they just did not have a good time making it. And the only thing that they were able to fall back on was Evil Dead. Now, a big famous producer, Dino De Laurentiis, who is, like I said, a big time producer. He's produced like hundreds of movies. He was one of the biggest producers in the industry. And he got a call from Stephen King, because Stephen King was such a big fan of the first movie that you may have noticed on like some of the marketing of the first film, on like posters or anything like that, it has a quote from Stephen King, because they saw that and went like, that's great marketing. So they took that and put it on every single poster that they did to drive up people's attention to it. So King called up De Laurentiis and said, I would like to see a sequel to Evil Dead 2, or I would like to see Evil Dead 2. De Laurentiis looked at the numbers of the first film and said, you know what, a sequel to this could make really good money in the foreign market, so outside of the United States. So he called up like Raimi, Campbell, and Tappert and said, hey, I will give you this amount of money, do Evil Dead 2. But the issue was that they didn't want to do another one. So they were thinking, I'll just have another team do it. But as I previously mentioned, Evil Dead was pretty much the only thing they can fall back on if they wanted to keep their careers going. So they end up doing it. Now, why it is pretty much a soft remake of the first movie is because they sold the rights to the first movie to, I believe it was New Line Cinema. And this is just so stupid. They couldn't get the rights back. So, in retrospect, they couldn't get the rights to their own movie, which is really stupid. So they had to basically reshoot it. So what they decided to do was, instead of the first movie where it was five of them. Trying to remember. I think it was five of them. They decided to solely focus it on Ash and his girlfriend Linda. So just two of them. So that's what happened. So if you watch Evil Dead 1 and you go like, well, what happened at the end? And then you watch Evil Dead 2, you're just like, what is going on? Like, it's repeating itself. That's why. It's because they couldn't get the rights to their own film, which is really stupid. But this movie is where the genre changes from just a straight up horror to a horror/comedy movie. Now, Sam Raimi is a big fan of the Three Stooges when he was a kid. So there's a lot of like slapstick going on. I mean, when you have a scene where, Ash's hand gets possessed and starts basically tormenting him, tossing him around, and like smashing plates against his head, it's basically just Bruce Campbell just being silly and just throwing plates at his head, doing backflips, and it's just him. But it's entertaining, and it's so funny, because you're just like, yeah, this was something that I think could be taken a little bit more seriously. But this series goes, oh, we don't care about being serious at all. We don't care. We're just here to have a good time. But the story of this one is, like the first movie, it was a bunch of friends. They just go to the cabin in the middle of the woods, and they find the Necronomicon Ex Mortis. I mean, I'm such a big fan of Evil Dead that I actually have a replica of that book. So I'm big fan. I have all of it. So this time it's just Ash and his girlfriend Linda go to cabin to have a romantic getaway together. But here's the problem. If I was having a romantic getaway with somebody, I would not pick an abandoned cabin in the woods, because it does not look peachy. It does not look nice. It looks very bad. And I would feel like there are killers out there, and, I would fear for my life. But that's just me. But they go there, and Ash finds a tape recording and the book, and starts looking at it and listening to the tape, and that's what summons evil. To then, the evil then gets his girlfriend, and now it's just all by himself until the professor who was on the recordings that he was listening to, that professor's daughter has more pages of the Necronomicon and is getting back to the cabin. Unfortunately, due to circumstances, because Ash is going crazy, he's, mentally, he's just not in the right place. She thinks that he killed her parents. So until they realize, oh, well, this is not good. So it becomes a cabin under siege film, where they're just stuck in one location. He tried getting out, and that didn't work. So they're stuck there. And so they just have to fight it off. So that's pretty much this movie. It's unlike the first film, it's, this one is more comedic. And, I would say better paced. You could definitely tell that they had a little bit more experience, with camera stuff and stuff like that. So you can clearly tell they have a little bit more experience under their belts. And yeah, this still feels like one of those movies where they're just like, hey, just do this. But they add more, more of what the Deadites, as they're called, what they look like, what they can do. They establish rules for Deadite possession, so it feels grounded. So they never go above those rules, because if you set rules, you need to set rules. I believe every horror villain or creatures or whatever, they need to have rules. And if they break those rules, it's like, well, what are you doing? It's like, what are you doing? This is, no. You set rules for yourself, and then you just immediately go and break it. It's like, yeah, that's, whatever. You've lost me. So that's something I love about the Evil Dead, not just trilogy, but the series, is that they stick to those rules. They never go above them. Even when it seems like they are, they're not. So I love that they kept that the same. Every movie or the TV show realizes that, and just like, hey, we just need to stay the same, but keep doing different things, so that way it branches out into new things. And yeah, Evil Dead 2 has a lot more comedic stuff, especially when you get to the third act. You're just kind of like, what is going on? This is just ridiculous. This is getting ridiculous. And apparently what was going on was, in a interview with, I think it was with Bruce, he talked about on Evil Dead 2, they were sharing offices with, I think it was with a school or something like that. And he was in one room, and then the next room they saw Sam Raimi and the other writer, I think it was Scott Spiegel, go into the next room. And then they just start hearing them laughing. And it's constant. It's just constant laughing. So he compared it to like, it was like they walked in there and I was hearing an insane asylum going on. Because they were laughing at their wacky ideas. So then when they then presented both Bruce and Tappert their ideas, they were going, you realize this is supposed to kind of be a horror movie? And it's like, yeah, I know. It's a horror movie, but it has comedy in it. So apparently there was more wackier ideas that they were just like, no, let's stop that. Please stop that. So, and it shows in this movie where you're just kind of going like, it's something, like I said, something horrific, but it immediately turns around to being funny. Like a lot of the gags in this movie. Like there's parts where you're just like, oh boy, and then you're just like trying not to laugh. So, that's all of this movie. So Evil Dead 2, it's a classic. I love it. You know, I can watch it and not be bored. I'll be entertained. It's just simple. It's just that simple. And so, of course, this gets it amazing. Of course, it gets it amazing. To then, the next one, we got Army of Darkness in 1992.
Darkness.
You found me beautiful once.
Honey, you got real ugly.
Sound the trumpets. Raise the drawbridge.
Look out!
Drop the Oldsmobile. From Sam Raimi,
Oh, that's gonna hurt!
director of Darkman, comes Army of Darkness. They live. They breathe.
Army of Darkness. Okay, I'm gonna get this out of the way first. This is personally my favorite of the trilogy. It's not the second one. And here's why. Like I previously mentioned, I watched the trilogy backwards. So I saw this one first, and then saw 2, and then saw 1. Well, I remember going to, it was a movie theater that when like the big ones weren't, it was more kind of like a, I guess you could say kind of more of a independent theater where they would get the movies after they weren't in the main theaters anymore. They would have them. So instead of paying like $15 a ticket now, you would pay maybe half that. And usually this theater would have monthly, they would have Saturday or Friday and Saturday night screenings and would show older films. And I remember going to this one, it was 3 times. My dad and I did it. It was to go see Monty Python, the Holy Grail, The Goonies, and Army of Darkness. So I saw this movie, technically in theaters, but after watching it, it took me a little bit because it was going like, I can't tell if this is supposed to be serious or I can't tell if this is supposed to be ridiculous because of, you know, this one has talking skeletons in it. So like, I can't tell. So it took me a little bit until I kept rewatching it. And then it just hit me. I'm like, I actually really like this. I don't know why it took me a while to figure that out, but it did. And this one is one of my favorite movies of all time. But not just that, it's one of the movies that I saw growing up that made me interested in the concept of filmmaking and why people would do it. So it sparked it I had that spark where it was like, you know what, I want to start learning how to do this stuff. And you know, what I typically now do with movies is I watch them and then after it, I'll then study them to go like, how did this happen? How did they make this happen? And with this, plans were put to make a third Evil Dead movie, but the issue is that Sam Raimi was busy doing a movie called Darkman with, I believe it was with Universal, and they were working on the Army of Darkness script throughout the production of Darkman, but something was going on. Universal took over, was basically in high demand for Darkman, so they were basically saying, hey, do this, make this way. And eventually at the end of it, I think they came out and said, like, yeah, this is not the movie that we wanted to make. Army of Darkness is no exception. If you've noticed, if you know your Evil Dead mythology, you'll know that this movie has 3 different cuts. There's the theatrical cut, the director's cut, and the international cut. Here in the US, we got the theatrical. Outside of the US, like I believe in the UK, they got the director's cut. So what ended up happening was the original movie was supposed to be the director's cut. But what ended up happening was that the studio wanted this movie to be PG-13. Raimi and everybody involved wanted it to be rated R. But after the tests, the MPAA gave the movie an NC-17. And it's like, what? Like, are you kidding me? And then I know even Bruce Campbell loves to joke about it, saying that Goodfellas had like tons more swearing and like tons more violence, and somehow gets an R rating, and Army of Darkness has talking skeletons and gets an NC-17 rating. It's just like, that's just one of the stupidest things I've heard. And so what ended up happening was Universal took over during post and basically made a cut and was saying like, this is the version that we want. So then Raimi then went in and added some more stuff to then make it get the R rating that he wanted. But unfortunately, that resulted in the theatrical cut being, I believe it was like 80 minutes long, when the director's cut is like an hour and a half. So multiple things are cut. Like a lot of jokes are trimmed, a lot of scenes are trimmed. And the director's cut feels more like complete, I guess. But you'll also, if you watch the theatrical version and then the director's version, the endings are different. The director's version was originally the version that was going to happen. Then they do sometimes what movies do is test screenings, is where they'll go and make a cut, and then they'll show it to an audience, and then the audience will then go like, hey, let's fix this, let's go with this. And then they go back and, do reshoots or change stuff in editing, and then they show it again. It was that kind of thing. The audiences, the test screeners went, we don't like this ending. This ending sucks. Or this ending is sad. To then they had to go back and change it. And personally, to me, I prefer the theatrical ending. Because we have a lot more one-liners. We get, this. It's like, see, this is what it is supposed to be. The director's cut ending makes sense because Ash is supposed to be he's pretty much the equivalent of a smart ass, where he's he's a jerk to everyone. He pretty much only thinks about him, but he himself is an idiot. And is just like, I'm just taking it one step at a time, and I'm just trying to understand everything, but I don't. And nor do I care to know. Which makes him appealing to me. He's got flaws to him, and, you know, we then play with those flaws. Like, you know, he's just a classic idiot. He's just like, I know I've been given specific instructions to do something. I will follow some of those and just make it up as I go. Why? Because I don't know any better. But the story of this one goes, it continues right after Evil Dead 2, and Ash gets sent back to medieval times and has to retrieve the Necronomicon to then get back to his time. So it's very much the fish out of water type movie, back when it's not being overdone. But originally they wanted this movie to be called The Medieval Dead, which is awesome. But Universal in the US went, no, we don't want this to make it look like a sequel to Evil Dead. So they went, well, what about Army of Darkness? And they just went, well, I guess we got to choose that because you're financing our movie, and if we say no, then you can easily pull the plug on this. So, sure. But they got to use that title outside of the US. Like I believe in England, it's called Army of Darkness, and then The Medieval Dead at the bottom of it. So at least they got to use it, but I still like that title. It's so clever. You know, Bruce, he is a very, you know, kind of over-the-top actor, but he embraces it. And I think if you don't embrace it, it's not going to work. You know, he knows how to play Ash. He really does. And I love, he's one of my favorite actors. You know, him not getting an Oscar, he does movies where I'm going like, yeah, you're not going to get nominated for an Oscar for this. But, you know, you have fans. You have the fans' support. And sometimes I think that's better than a trophy than a statue telling you did a good job, is for an audience and fans to tell you you're doing a good job. To me, I think that's better, but that's just me. But Army of Darkness is a nice, you know, conclusion to Sam Raimi's trilogy. But of course, fans wanted more. And then they went and turned around and went like, okay, we'll do another one. But then they then said like, well, let's do a show. And the show takes place, I think it was 30 years later. And what's even funny about it is that Bruce, I think in a Comic-Con, said what's so great about this character is Ash, even in his prime, would be the wrong guy to save the world. Now he's 30 years older and he has to save the world. It's like, oh boy, this is not going to go well. And his explanation is right. Like, in Army of Darkness, I'm just going, yeah, I don't trust him to save us all. I don't trust him at all. I just don't. So, yeah. But, yeah, Army of Darkness, it's my favorite of the series. It's actually my favorite of the series. Because I saw it at a young age and it had a big impression on me. And it was one of the first movies that showed me like, wow, how powerful and how creative filmmaking can be, and that I actually want to be involved in that somehow. So every time I see it, I can easily watch it, and the jokes are still funny. It's still, even though I quote it all the time, it's still funny to me, and I love it. So Army of Darkness is my favorite, but I absolutely do recommend this trilogy. you know, and even the whole series. The whole series is great. You know, despite what you think of the Evil Dead remake they made, I don't think it's as bad as people say it is, but that's just me. But yeah, Evil Dead, it's such an iconic and fun series to watch, and I absolutely recommend it. So if you haven't seen them, I don't know where you've been. You absolutely need to watch them, because they are a lot of fun.
Darkness.
You found me beautiful once.
Honey, you got real ugly.
Sound the trumpets. Raise the drawbridge.
Something so evil. We prayed it would never happen again.